Hi, I'm Cheryl Prentice. I'm the marketing director at the Auburn Deusenberg Museum. This is the grand staircase in the 1930 showroom that's fully restored. It's a fine example of the Art Deco architecture in the Midwest. Everything that's in the museum here is classic vintage or antique automobiles. We have over 100 on display at any given time. In the showroom we have Auburn Cords and Deusenbergs. Upstairs we have a gallery of Deusenbergs as well as the gallery of classics and some special interest cars. This is an E1 Cord prototype. It's a very rare automobile and it just recently arrived at the museum. It is a prototype that was never put into production. It was to be the next generation at Cord L29, and EO Cord commissioned its design in 1929. However, the stock market crash in October of 1929 postponed his plans. After the Depression hit and the stock market crash of October 1929, the plans for the next generation Cord L29 were scrapped. This was supposed to come out in 1932. So when it was scrapped, the car was scrapped out and the body was sent to Chicago. Paul Bryant began the restoration process, which took him 25 years. The engine in this car was separated from the car when it was scrapped out, and it was taken down the street to the brick building that housed the Auburn Automobile Company's factory electrical plant. And for a number of years it was used to produce electricity. Eventually the city of Auburn took over the electrical plant and incorporated it into the city utilities. Sometime in the 1960s that engine was replaced by a more modern diesel engine, and so the engine was brought back here to the museum. Paul Bryant and Auburn's Jack Randonelli discovered that the number on the engine matched the number on this body. And so they reunited the body with the engine in the restoration process, and it was like discovering gold. This is a 1932 Deusenberg Murphy torpedo convertible. It was owned by Don Carr, who gave it to the museum back in 1982. However, the car has had three previous celebrity owners. Cliff Durant owned the car, J. Paul Getty owned the car, and author John O'Hara owned the car before Don Carr had it. Don Carr drove this Deusenberg over 100,000 miles because he very firmly believed that the car should be driven and not just shown. And so this car was given to the museum and has been in the showroom here. It's in excellent condition and was restored by the volunteers at the museum. This is a 1931 Auburn Boattail Speedster. The Boattail Speedster was considered the epitome of speed and fashion and modernism and anything that was the cutting edge. The Boattail Speedster has an 8-cylinder engine in it. It also is supercharged, which you can see by the pipes that come out of the engine on the sides. Although the Boattail design never caught on with some other car manufacturers, it remains as one of the most distinctive designs of all time. Al Leamy had a great idea in the Boattail. This 1931 Cord is sometimes known as the Jean Harlow car, even though it was actually owned by her husband, Paul Burns. The original car was purchased in 1931 at the Paris Auto Show, but later it was destroyed somewhere in Europe and its whereabouts are unknown. Later on, this car was commissioned by Stan Gilliland and it was built from the original blueprints of the Cord. It features a bar in the door and a number of other stylish features and custom design features that he wanted in the car. This is a 1930 Deusenberg Model J that was owned by C.W. Bocock and his wife Martha. They lovingly restored this car themselves and then drove it for over 30 years, exhibiting it at shows and taking it on tour. The Deusenberg is a convertible and is a fine example of the Model J in that it was custom built as all Model J's were. I'm with Marion Myers, who's been a volunteer at the museum here for 15 years. Marion is one of the original Auburn Automobile Company employees. Marion, how long did you work for the Auburn Automobile Company?
3 years, 27, 28, and 29.
And what kind of jobs did you do for the Auburn Automobile Company?
Anything they asked me, I drove them off the line, and I worked on the line. And
did you do manufacturing kind of jobs too? Did you do parts or anything?
Just assembly.
Just assembly.
Just assemble.
And how much did you get paid for your work?
We got 22.5 cents an hour, I did.
Did you work Monday through Friday?
Worked Monday to Saturday noon.
Saturday noon then.
Yep.
And how many hours a day did you work?
We worked 12 hours a day, no break.
No break at all.
No break.
What was the most exciting job you had?
I imagine driving them off the line, the cord.
You drove the cord off the line?
Drove the cord off.
And how come you ended up doing that?
Wouldn't nobody else drive it off, and he asked me to do it, and I drove them off.
Were they afraid to drive it?
No, they just don't want to do another job.
Oh, I see.
They were farmers, and they didn't want to do another job.
Right. Did you work in this building, or did you work in the other buildings?
Worked in the building that's back of this here. This wasn't here.
So you worked in what's now the NatMast building?
Well, it's on beyond that.
Oh, so there was buildings there that are demolished now.
There was close to 100 acres back there.
Wow, that was a big complex.
Yeah, there was a lot of buildings.
How many people worked here when you were unemployed?
I really have no idea, but they walked all over you. Everything was done by hand. We had a lot of women working. They made all the upholstering and the tops for the seat covers and whatever you had.
Now tell me about the poster that you're in. What poster are you in?
I'm in the east line. It was the east line, and we was putting on, they dropped the body down through a hole, and we put it on. There was 4 of us had to put it on there.
And that poster was used to celebrate the museum's 25th anniversary, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yeah, he's in the silver anniversary photo.
Yes.
Well, it's nice to talk to you today, Marion.
Well, thank you.
And thank you so much for your volunteer work here. We're standing in the gallery of special interest cars on the first floor of the Auburn Deusenberg Museum. This gallery contains a wide variety of cars, all the way from a Ferrari used in set a record in a Mexican race to a 1912 Locomobile, and several other cars that will be easily recognized by visitors who come to the museum. I am standing on the dead level floor, which is one of 2 floors in the building in this section. The dead level floor was used to calibrate engines and equipment for the Auburn Cords and Deusenbergs, and so the engineers worked in this part of the building, and this floor is exactly dead level, and it's built on a separate foundation from the main building, so that it always remains exactly level at all times, even if the building would change. This is a 1952 Ferrari, which took 3rd place in a race in Baja, Mexico. This car is considered very valuable and is very rare, and is valued at probably $2.2 million. It is the most expensive car in the museum, and it is indescribable in the way that it feels when you are driving and riding in it. Those who have had the privilege of driving it say that the experience is like no other. This 1948 Tucker is one of the more popular exhibits at the Auburn Deusenberg Museum. There were 51 Tuckers built, 48 have survived, and so the car is very rare. It was especially noted for the Cyclops headlight here on the front, which turned as the wheels turned so that you could better see around corners as you were driving. The Tucker was marketed as a car with a number of very forward-thinking safety features. It has steel construction, bulkhead construction, very similar to a boat. There are a number of safety features built into the passenger compartment, one of which is an area on the passenger side where the driver could dive into in the event of a crash. This 1911 Metallurgique is one of the earliest known examples of a boat tail speedster design. This was a Belgium race car, and it was designed and manufactured in Belgium for a man from Scotland. So it was used in Scotland for a number of years before it was shipped over to the United States. Later on, a family restored the car and gave it to the museum last fall, in the fall of 2002. The car is unique in that it is very forward-thinking in terms of the boat tail design and the race car, except the battery is located in a box on the running board. This fabulous example of a Cord is Gordon Bierig's personal car. It has been in our showroom off and on for a number of years. It is still very much used by the family. Mrs. Bierig and her grandson often come to the museum to take the car out for parades, and it was most recently driven in the Parade of Classics in 2003. This is a 1904 Auburn, and it is the earliest known Auburn known to exist. It was part of the Auburn Automobile Company's first and early models. The car was one of about 50 cars built and is the only known one to survive. The Auburn is typical of a lot of other cars of the same era being built in that it very much resembled a carriage and had the right side steering wheel. This is a 1900 Eckhart carriage, and a fine example of the type of vehicle that the Eckhart Carriage Company built as the predecessor to the Auburn Automobile Company. Eckharts were known as quality carriage builders, and their carriages were well known throughout the Midwest. Part of the reason the carriage company was so successful is that there was an abundance of timber and good quality craftsmanship in the area that allowed them to build such quality carriages. I'm standing in the middle of the Dean Cruz Gallery of Auburn Automobiles, which showcases the era between 1919 and 1924. This was the pre-E.L. Cord era, before E.L. Cord came to Auburn to rescue the company. The company was owned at the time by a group of Chicago investors, which also included William Wrigley. The cars that you see here are set in an example of what a typical Auburn dealership looked like in the 1920s. The heavy draperies and beautiful lamps are significant to that period. Marion, can you explain to me what that is?
It's on a board outside the door, out in the hallway, and it's 426.
Was that your employee number?
My number. And then I hang it on the board inside on 426, and then I get paid.
That's so they knew you showed up at work every day.
That's the way you get paid.
I'm standing in Gordon Bierig's restored clay model studio, which is on the second floor of the Auburn Cord Deusenberg Museum. This was in the design area of the museum at the southwest corner of the building. Gordon Bierig pioneered the use of clay sculpture as a design tool in creating the Cord 810 and 812. What you see behind me is the various stages of the clay model process, and then there are two actual life-size blueprints on the wall to my right. Those blueprints are unique in that there are very few that survived because they were thrown away after use. But the clay models were used to determine scale, and then the life-size blueprints were drawn from there. And then they were sent to engineering. Gordon Bierig invented the styling bridge while he was working on the Cord design project, and it allowed him to go directly from the quarter scale models up to the full-size body drafts that you see on the wall behind you. It saved the company time, and it saved the company money, and was very efficient. The clay modeling concept then was used in most other car manufacturers into the 40s, 50s, and 60s. This is a photograph of what the design studio originally looked like when Gordon Bierig was working in it in 1930. This is a recreation of Al Leamy's office when he worked at the Auburn Automobile Company in the late 20s and early 30s. Al Leamy was considered to be one of the greatest automotive designers that ever lived, and he was responsible for the front end of the Model J Deusenberg, the Auburn Boattail Speedster, and several other Auburn designs. He was a very successful designer until about 1934, when he left the Auburn Automobile Company and went to Detroit. About a year after he left the Auburn Automobile Company, he died from complications of an injection that he received in a medical office and got blood poisoning. And so he died at the age of 33 in 1935. Many of the artifacts that you see in this office were donated to the museum by his widow, Agnes. These four cars are his dream cars. That The designs were drawn but were never produced. I'm standing in the Indiana-built gallery of the Auburn Deusenberg Museum. This gallery features many of the cars who were built in Indiana during the 1900s and on into the 1970s. Studebaker was a major builder of cars in Indiana, and probably the last surviving one. The gallery I'm standing in now is the Hoosier Pioneer Gallery, which features many of the early automobiles that were built in the late 1800s and into 1900. Many of these cars are one-of-a-kind examples. The Waverly and the Black and the Iser are cars that made a name for themselves in history just by being first. This is a 1930 Jones Stutz race car. It ran in the Indianapolis 500, where it finished first in its class and 10th overall in the race. It was modified only slightly from its regular stock car options on it, with the exception of taking the fenders off and having a much larger gas tank. It's a stock vehicle in every other way, right down to being equipped with a cigar lighter. The Stutz was very well known for its speed and design, and did very well in that 500 and did for a number of years. You may think that the only thing the Auburn Deusenberg Museum has is big flashy Auburns and Cords and Deusenbergs, but we also have a fine exhibit on the history of the Studebaker, which includes this Crosley here. This is a 1952 Crosley, which was near the end of its manufacturing year. This is Frank Lloyd Wright's L29 Cord, which he purchased new in 1929 and had it painted Taliesin orange, which was his signature color. It was a color he was very fond of, and he used it in a number of his homes that he designed throughout the 20s and 30s and 40s. The Cord he considered to be the greatest designed automobile of all time up to that point. And as someone who could truly appreciate design, he thought the Cord was out of this world. Here we have the 1952 Crosley that Frank Lloyd Wright owned. He used this one as well as a number of others as staff cars and was very appreciative of its economy. This 1910 example of a Zimmerman car is a prime example of a car in original condition. This exhibit in the past gallery of special topics at the Auburn Deusenberg Museum shows our visitors the difference between preservation and restoration. This Zimmerman has been preserved in its natural state, exactly as the condition that it's been since it was manufactured. Our 1908 Auburn was restored by our museum volunteers after it was discovered in a barn in southern Indiana in pieces after the barn had been hit by a tornado. Restoration is an important thing because it allows vehicles to be saved that otherwise would remain in baskets and parts. And so we have the best of both worlds in preserving prime examples of cars in their original condition, as well as using restoration to bring back to life cars who are given a second chance. This is a 1966 prototype of the Deusenberg. It was the last Deusenberg designed in the late 60s, which was an attempt to bring the Deusenberg back on the market. It never really succeeded, and this was the only prototype built. It's located in the Gallery of Classics at the Auburn Deusenberg Museum, which features many of the marks of the cars that were contemporaries of the mighty Deusenberg. It also features a number of Model J Deusenbergs, as well as a Cadillac chassis that was used for show purposes, a Model X Deusenberg, and a number of other special interest cars. Currently, we have on display in this gallery many Deusenbergs, probably the largest display of Deusenbergs open to the public in the world at this point, including the Model J and the Model X. The 1932 Mud Deusenberg is the car over here. It's distinctive for its entirely leather-clad body, and of course, like all Deusenbergs, it was custom designed for Dr. Seeley Mudd. The car has been on exhibit here since the festival in 2003. It was very distinctive because it looks a little bit different, and it had the exhaust pipes coming through the hood on the front hood, which was also distinctive for a Deusenberg. On the other side, I have the Mormon Meteor, which is the Deusenberg that Ab Jenkins set the speed record at the Mormon Salt Flats in Utah. This one is a very important exhibit in the museum and attracts a lot of visitors, and we are lucky to have it here on exhibit for a short time. Gordon Buehrig went on to have a very distinguished career as a designer after he left the Auburn Automobile Company. This 1979 Buehrig carriage roof coupe was the result of some of his latest design efforts before his death in 1990. What we have on this side is a 1948 Tasco, which Gordon Buehrig worked on in the 40s as a design, and it's very much inspired by aviation. The idea was to be very modern looking by copying the design of airplanes. This is the office of E.L. Cord, who was president of the Auburn Automobile Company, and this is where he ran his Cord Corporation. From this office, he could look out of those windows behind me and survey the entire Auburn Automobile complex. Many of the items that are in this office were donated by his wife, Virginia Cord, and are some of his personal effects. We have the organ that was located in his home, as well as several items of furniture. There are also a number of items in a glass case that were his personal effects. E.L. Cord was an impeccably groomed man, and he wore midnight blue suits everywhere. He had a number of suits. They were all the same color, all identical, with a white shirt and either a blue or black tie. He never varied from that, and was always correct for whatever business meeting he was attending. This is the Auburn Gallery of early Auburns. Before 1900, there were very few car manufacturers anywhere, but in the period between 1900 and 1919, there were 11 manufacturers of automobiles in the city of Auburn. The Zimmerman, the Kiblinger, the Runabout, and the Cycle Car were all cars that were very limited in numbers, and very few were manufactured, and even fewer survived. Many of these have wooden bodies that didn't stand up to the test of time, and many of these other cars were only one of its kind in existence. The Cycle Car here is kind of a cross between a motorcycle and a car, in that it has a very large belt drive along the side, and it was advertised as being thin enough to drive through your garden gate and park on your porch. However, the belt drive proved to be rather unhandy on some of the early roads, which were all mud, and it would very quickly fill up with mud and wasn't very practical. This is the Hall of Technology in the Auburn Cord Deusenberg Museum, which showcases many of the technological advances of the Auburn Automobile Company. Many people are surprised to learn that technological advances that were developed and designed in this building are used in production cars today, such things as retractable headlights, front-wheel drive, hydraulic brakes, and unit body construction were all part of today's cars as well. What we have here is a number of examples of engines. This is a Model A Deusenberg engine, which you can look at in all of its technological detail. And we also have another number of engines. We have a Cord 810 engine right here, and we also have an Auburn engine on the other side. The Auburn engine was noted for its simplicity of styling, but it was very dependable. It set a lot of speed and endurance records, and was considered to be a very important engine, and certainly one of the best engines of its time period. The engine over here, we also have a couple of aircraft engines. Many people don't realize that the Deusenberg brothers were involved in research into aircraft engines before World War I. And they worked on designing this aircraft engine during World War I, but because of government delays and red tape, they never got the engine finished by the time the war ended. We'd like to encourage anyone who is interested in either the old cars or their history or the people who were behind them to come out and visit the Auburn Cord Deusenberg Museum. We're located at 1600 South Wayne Street in Auburn, Indiana. Our phone number is 260-925-1444, and we're open every day 9 to 5 except Thanksgiving Day, Christmas Day, and New Year's Day.